mouth when it came down to the punishment. Am I making sense? You could take these verses, we could go for long ways, we could take these verses, compare them to the Gospels, and what you have is the details as to the motivation behind why Jesus doesn't open his mouth. It's there right here, because it's related to his suffering and his dying, and it's exactly the same thing in the Gospels when he remains silent to allow this to happen to him. Because if he, wouldn't Jesus have been able to, in defending himself and exonerating himself, wouldn't he had the perfect case, and wouldn't he have been the best person on planet Earth to be able to explain why he shouldn't go on the cross? And wouldn't he be right? So he kept his mouth shut so he could go on the cross. Because if he spoke the truth there about his not really deserving the cross, he would not be submitting to his Father's will, which in the garden he was told, this is the will, okay? And he would not redeem us from our sins. There's a motivation behind his silence. It's not just that he remains silent. So not only does he fulfill the prophecy, you understand why he does it. This is incredible. It's good enough for me to say that Isaiah said he would be quiet, but then when you look at the details as to why, it all comes full circle. How can you deny this? Any questions or thoughts? Anybody want to add anything? It's amazing.
I wonder if that was hard for him to do.
What do you think?
I mean, you know, he knew that was what he had to do, but I mean, I'm wondering if that might have not been easy.
I have been, for my sermon for this Sunday, I've been studying a guy, I don't know if everybody ever heard you, he's a Lutheran pastor by the name of Richard Wormbrand. Any of you ever hear of him? Just a remarkable story. I'll save it for Sunday or Saturday. But to answer that question, divine love is what's doing this. I do not think that at any time, even though Jesus says, is this your will, Father? There's no, boy, should I or shouldn't I? Like I would do, or you would do, right? It's not, should I go through? This is his character. This is his love. This is what God does. God would never not do this in these circumstances. He takes on complete responsibility for us. Okay? By oppression and judgment, he was taken away. And who can speak of his descendants? What does that mean? Well, did Jesus have any descendants? He didn't have any children. So, just speaking from an earthly standpoint, he didn't have any children, so he didn't have any descendants. But did he have descendants? And when you will just hold on to this, because in chapter 54, the first verse there, it'll talk about a desolate woman and her husband and the fulfillment of this. So we'll get to that. All right. For he was cut off from the land of the living for the transgression of my people. This is Isaiah speaking. He was stricken. All right, we'll leave that at that. But remember that part. Who could speak of his descendants? From a worldly standpoint, you can't. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. What's that all about? Joseph of Arimathea, right?
He was rich and gave the tomb.
That's right. He was assigned the grave of the wicked. If Joseph of Arimathea, you right? If Joseph of Arimathea would not have claimed the body, what would they have done with Jesus' body? And this is historically, you know this for sure because they found bodies like this. What would they have done with Jesus' body? They would have thrown it.
They were buried where the poor people were.
Yeah, they would have thrown him in the mass grave with all the other. Those who were crucified were thrown in mass graves. So he would be assigned. But what is Joseph of Arimathea do? Who's a very rich man? He's a Pharisee. He claims the body. Okay, so he was assigned a grave to the wicked, and with the rich in his death, Joseph of Arimathea. Nor was any deceit in his mouth. Okay. Isn't that interesting? Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life a guilt offering, all right, just for the sake of time, if you want to do this, you could write down Leviticus 5:15 is where you have a guilt offering, and a guilt offering is a ram. All right? It can also be a lamb. So if you don't have a ram, you can take a lamb. All right? And a guilt offering is the kind of offering where you might have done something to somebody, but it wasn't your intention to do so. And so they would be atoned for with a guilt offering, which again it's not like where you intentionally did something, maybe by accident I hurt you or something like that. And I can go into a guilt offering, sacrifice, have the priest sacrifice a ram to bring about atonement, okay? Now with that in mind, go all the way back to when the sacrifice of a ram happened with Abraham and Isaac. Remember that? Isaac was going to be the guilt offering. Was it his intentions? No, neither was it Abraham's intention to do it, but God told him to do it. And what did they find? A ram in the thickets. I think this is kind of interesting. And they make that sacrifice. All right? So, what does God say to Abraham? He stops him and says, not your son, your only son. Now I know, right? And what is God saying? No, it won't be your son that will be the guilt offering. It will be my son. And here he's a guilt offering. All right? Now think about Jesus again. He's the sinless one. He's dying for the sins of the world, yet he did not commit them. The guilt offering would be the perfect offering here. Because of his intentions. See, he didn't do anything. Even though he is now being punished for the sins of the world, he didn't do it. It's not like he did it. But he did it because we did it. And he became us. See? So he becomes the guilt offering, which goes exactly with Leviticus chapter 5 when he described the guilt offering. You'll find it's somebody who did something wrong, but it wasn't his intentions to do it. He will, okay, this is cool too, okay, so he becomes the guilt offering, and then he will see his offering and prolong his offspring and prolong his days. Go back up to, and who can speak of his descendants? And your first thought from the human perspective is, you don't have any kids. All right? Now, what's the perspective? Remember we said over here, each one turned his own way. we considered him stricken by God. So anybody watching the crucifixion of Jesus from the human perspective says what? He's being stricken by, and he is being stricken by God. But what are they thinking? They think he's on the cross not for the atoning of the sins of the world, but he's guilty of something, and God is now what? Punishing him. The divine God is punishing Jesus. So they considered him stricken by God. That's true, but for a different reason. See? And you got the same thing here. I hope I'm explaining myself right. So, we're sitting there as human beings, and we heard the story of Jesus. This is the miracle worker. Not long ago, there's claims that he raised Lazarus from the dead after being there for 4 days. And that's what gets everybody excited. That's why during during the Passover on Palm Sunday, they're putting the branches before the Jesus as he rides into Jerusalem, and they're expecting something big to happen in Jerusalem. Everybody's excited. These same people are excited about Jesus who see him now on the cross. He's a failure. Who would consider any of his descendants? If he doesn't have any descendants, his bloodline doesn't go. That's not good. It's really important for them to have children. When you were a barren woman and you didn't have children, you were considered cursed by God. This is a man that has no descendants. From the human perspective, that guy is being stricken by God. He's a failure, and he's not even going to have any descendants to claim him. Flip it around, and what you have is the atonement for the sins of the world is happening, and his descendants are going to be who? Us. Through the very atonement that is happening on the cross where everybody else is saying he's a failure. And he's not a failure. He's a loving God who's saving you. See that? And so isn't this true that from a human perspective, the Christian salvation is stupid, it's illogical, I don't want it, it's a bloody mess, it's a failure. From God's perspective, the very thing that we watch that God does is atonement for sins, forgiveness of sins. It claims us as his children. It brings about the kingdom of God that lasts forever, and we are now God's children. You could take this another step. The fact that we're Gentiles, it says we have been grafted into the tree. We're not the bloodline of Jesus like the Jew can claim. What does it say? We're grafted in. We inherit this because of faith. So this is so interesting. So, from one perspective, human perspective, and now it's like he will see his offspring. He will see you. You're his offspring, and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Yeah, it will. Now the will of the Lord is complete. Right? And after the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. What is that all about? Resurrection. And God is satisfied because the atonement for the sins of the world is complete. The resurrection is a proclamation from the Father that Jesus' sacrifice was sufficient. So after the suffering of his soul, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. Satisfaction has been made. The wrath of God is no longer mine. It's been paid for. And now I feel like here's the aftermath. Here we are. And we are on a floating down like, have you ever gone down a lazy river? Have you ever gone down a lazy river? Like, what do they call it? Where's that place that we would go? The Kalahari, there's this lazy river. They have all kinds of rides and stuff. You go down slides and freak out. But there's this one where it's a lazy river. And you just get yourself on a tube and it just floats you along. It's really nice. That's what I get from this. Because the wrath of God is now complete. There's no more wrath. So by his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, that's you and me, and he will bear their iniquity. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong. Now there's like battle. This is kind of like a battle, right? He's now dividing the spoils. Who did he just defeat? He defeated Satan. And so this is where the battle lies. The battle is, this kingdom has to do with the sacrifice of the king, not like others. Remember, we always have a comparison between nations. The kingdom of God, the king dies. When a king in an earthly nation triumphs, the king is the one that doesn't die. He would be the last one to die, right? And he would divide the spoils. In the kingdom of God, when Jesus is crucified, that's when Satan is defeated. Because Satan's blind spot is love. If Satan was here, he could give you a very logical and true reason as to why God should not give us up from hell. And that was his point. When he was able to move man into becoming sinful, he said, I got you, checkmate, Jesus, right? But what does God say? He says, he talks to Satan, he talks to man and the woman and says, you're going to have a rough life. I'm paraphrasing. And he goes to Satan and he says, you're going to crawl on your belly, and guess what? From her seed, from the woman's seed, you're going to get crushed. Because your evil can't understand the love of God. Everything is set. If you look at what from Satan, if God was not love like this, if God does not have this kind of love, Satan is right. Okay? Because that's his one blind spot. He could not conceive, neither can we, neither can anybody who rejects the gospel. You cannot conceive of God doing this. Can you? From your own perspective? No. Neither can Satan. So he says, checkmate. There's nothing you can do. What he's thinking is you have to. You promise that if we sin, we die. Right? So is Satan right? Yeah. He says, okay, God, I got them to fall from you. They're dead. This is the only thing that is going to be able to checkmate Satan. And it has everything to do with love. Okay. Any questions about that? You're going to find in our gospel lesson for this Sunday, I would also tell you it's in Romans chapter 12, it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and other places where you'll find either Paul or Jesus himself, he'll say it this Sunday, he'll talk about what true love is to turn the other cheek, to love your persecutor, love those who hate you. That's what true love is. All right? And you'll find that the love that we use for each other to get along in life is never going to be that love. It's the justice that we seek as human beings, that we expect our government to administer, and rightfully so, is not the love that redeems. Okay? For instance, Lowell, if somebody comes in and shoots you and you're dead, all right?
Yeah.
And I know who did it, I will tell the police who did it, because I want the police to throw that guy in the jail for the rest of his life. Why? For justice. All right? And would you agree? Yes. Also, it's very interesting when I think about the friends that I have. And think about the friends you have. Are they people that irritate you? Or is it a friendship where I really like hanging out with you? And so why don't you and I go out and have a beer? Why don't you and I go play racquetball or whatever it is? Let's go fishing, and I really like hanging out. And there's this sense of love between myself and that person, right? Because I kind of like you, we're good buddies, you like me, and we go out and there's this sense of love, right? And then Jesus comes around, and Paul also comes around. Let's just take Jesus' words. Jesus says, that ain't nothing. Believers and non-believers do that. Okay? You'll hear that this Sunday. That ain't nothing. Don't consider yourself such a good guy because that's how you handle people. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't go fishing with people I don't like to be with. Do you? Do you call up those people that you don't really like and say, hey, let's go hang out? No. That's how we work though, right? Isn't that how we work? I'm going to hang out with people who have like interests. You're going to do the same thing. None of that saves anybody. But that's how we operate in this world, right? Somebody else will come around and maybe I don't like you, but maybe I work with you, so I'll have to what you? I'll have to tolerate. I'll have to tolerate you. And I might say, you know what, since we have to work together, what? I'm going to really try hard to, right? What's my motivation here? What's my motivation?
It's to make yourself feel better.
Exactly, exactly, because you're now in a situation, and so, you know what Jesus says to all that monkey business? Don't pat yourself on the back. Because this is not the love that saves, it's different. And to this point, now, am I justified for doing this? From a human perspective, if somebody irritates me, and let's say that person always puts me down, so whenever I'm around, he tells me the same old stupid joke, and it just irritates me, and so I try to avoid him. Would you say I'm justified to do that?
You said from a human perspective.
Well, that's how I operate. That's how you operate, see? And from the situation where if somebody does something wrong to another human being, we need the government, we need the police to do something to straighten that thing out. We're not asking the government to promote the gospel. Do you notice that? And all of us who think that that's the case, I want the government to execute the law so we can have kind of a semblance of order here. And God puts that in place so that we can get along in life. Does any of that stuff save? No. Would we call it just? Would we call it just? Yeah, that person who killed you ought to go to jail. That's justice. We have to have that in order to get along in life, right? See how that? God says none of that saves, even though you need it. See? And this is what I would suggest is this is where we miss the gospel. This is where Satan misses God. Because what Jesus says is, love your enemy. Love those who persecute you. And ultimately, that's exactly what God does. And that's what saves. That's the blind spot of all of us. And it's the blind spot of Satan as well, see? There's his blind spot. Okay? This pastor is an incredible pastor. He died in 2001. I'll just give you guys, he was born in 1907. This Richard, what was the name? Wormbrand. He was an atheist Jew in Romania. He became a Christian because somebody gave him a Bible. He became a Lutheran pastor, and he spent 14 years in a prison being tortured for those 14 years because communism came into Romania. Okay, and if you hear the things that they did to him and other Christians across the line. And some of the stories, it's amazing. What's so beautiful about his story, he's a very humble man. I would, look him up. You listen, watch some of his sermons that he preached. Well, they're all post when this stuff happened. He said that he was given a love for his persecutors. The Christians loved the persecutors, those who were torturing him. And I believe it. Watch him. You believe him. That they were given that kind of love. That's godly love. That's divine love. That's the stuff we don't understand. That's what saves people. See? All right? Mm-hmm.
It's Wormbrand?
Wormbrand, yes.
Okay,
I
I found it
Yeah.
on here,
Yeah.
yeah. There's actually some kind of an audio book.
He's an amazing man. He is amazing, and I just got to know him this week. Yeah, check out the, all right. So, there you go. So, the one who loves us, God, in that way, he gives a portion. He divides the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his life into death, and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. And that is how chapter 53 ends. But last week still goes further, doesn't it? 54. This is cool. Now we go to a future glory. So we're leaving the crucifixion and into the future glory. So now that this has all happened, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, sing, O barren woman. Why is it sing, O barren woman? You who never bore a child, burst into song and shout for joy. You who were never in labor, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband, says the Lord. Now, what was the situation if you bore no children in the Old Testament? You were considered cursed by God, and you have a lot of examples of that. Okay, think of Hannah and her crying, right? Is that true today too? I mean, I know there are women, when women can't bear a child, and they're trying to have a child, it's a very sad thing, right? But look at how it's spoken. It's the barren woman. You've never bore a child. That metaphor is now speaking of, okay, you, all right, have more than the one who has a husband, says the Lord. Why? Who ultimately is the barren woman? Who was the barren woman in the Old Testament that brought forth the continued promise? Sarah. Then Rebecca. Then Rachel had a big time promise till the end. He gave Jacob the last two children. Right? The barren woman is a metaphor for who? Think eschatologically now. Think future. Don't think of a human being. Think something collectively. The barren woman is the
Church.
The church.
I didn't have confidence until you said collectively.
Yes, and that's what happens, doesn't it? And when you do that kind of a thing, you notice that when you start speaking, when we now talk about the future glory of Zion, which this is all about, when you start moving into the metaphors, it now speaks of the conclusion of the whole thing. All right? We are the barren church, but now, and this is very much like, go back to verse 8 of chapter 53, and who can speak of the suffering servant's descendants? Well, now you have your answer. We all can. The barren women of the Old Testament were given a child by a miracle, right? In order for the promise to happen. The promise of the seed. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtain wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. For you will spread out to the right and to the left. Your descendants will depossess nations and settle in the desolate cities. Do not be afraid. You will not suffer shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. You will forget the shame of your youth, and remember no more the reproach of your widowhood. For your Maker is your husband. The Lord Almighty is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. Don't you feel calm now after it's all now? It's a declaration of the fact that now the Redeemer is yours. He is called the God of all the earth. The Lord will call you back as if you were a wife deserted and distressed in spirit, a wife who married young, only to be rejected, says your God. I'm thinking about, remember when we talked about the, back in the days of Moses, a young woman would be married to a man, and the man could give her a certificate of divorce because he wants to go find another woman. Remember all that stuff? That sense there. For a brief moment I abandoned you, but with deep compassion I will bring you back. In a surge of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness I will have compassion on you, says the Lord your Redeemer. What does that speak to you right there?
Is that when God turned his back on Jesus?
No, he's speaking to the church now, he's speaking to you. Notice, Jesus is the Redeemer. Okay, you and I, all of us are we now have, we're prospering, we're the children of God now. Okay? But he's now saying, there was a time when I hid from you. But it was just for a time. But then what? Everlasting kindness comes. We could take it several different ways. You could take the whole Old Testament story and you have that happening with Israel, don't you? If you want to put it in the context of Isaiah, you have it with the kingdoms coming and,
Yes.
right? The exile is a big one, the exile. But remember, now when you apply it to yourself, I would suggest that this is what's happening now. I do have a Savior, but, does life happen, bad things happen to me now?